Now, as I said, I left a lot out. There's a lot more in the book, but we have very limited time here tonight. And if you'd hold your questions on this section, on the evolution section, in about 25 minutes we're going to take questions, but we have to do the third argument for the existence of God, if I can indulge you with this. And that will require us to go to what we call Lesson 6. This is still in Does God Exist? The Moral Law. Last time we covered the cosmological argument in the previous lesson, and we covered the teleological argument. Now we're moving on to what is known as the moral argument for the existence of God. Now the first two arguments here are scientific in nature. You can get evidence for these arguments by either looking through a telescope or looking into a microscope, which we have done. However, the third argument's not scientific in nature at all. It's more philosophical, yet it's the argument we've known since we were very small children. And it's the argument from morality. It says if there is one thing morally wrong out there, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million Jews in a Holocaust, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there's no standard beyond humanity, then that's just your opinion against, say, Hitler's opinion. If there's no standard out there, it's just us, who's to say you're right and Hitler's wrong? There is no right. It's just your opinion. It's just in you. But we all intuitively understand there are certain things that are really objectively right and other things that are objectively wrong. But they have to be based in an object, not just in us, the subject. I mentioned my friend Bob Cornuke, who's the real Indiana Jones. And we've been on a number of trips together. And last year, Christmas, just before Christmas 2010, we went on a kind of a different kind of trip. We went across Europe and hit many of the World War II sites and many of the Reformation sites. We started in London, went into France, drove across France, went to Normandy, all that, then went into Germany, and along the way, on our way to Berlin, we stopped at several places Martin Luther was, where he went to seminary, and then where he tacked his 95 Theses on the door in the church in Wittenberg, Germany. On our way to Wittenberg, we stopped at the Buchenwald concentration camp in Wiedmar, Germany, not far from Erfurt, Germany, where Luther went to seminary. Now, in April of 1945, the Allies liberated the camp. They went through the front gate, which is still there. They looked to the right, and they saw the crematorium, which is still there. When they got down to the crematorium, they looked into the courtroom attached to the crematorium, and this is what they saw. Now, if there is no God, that's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion, that this was objectively morally wrong. Is this just a matter of opinion? If there's no God, who's to say that's wrong? The leader of the expedition, or the Allied forces, I should say, was so incensed, he went into the town of Wiedmar and he ordered every civilian into the town to see what was going on right under their noses. In fact, if you go there today, you will see on the crematorium a plaque which says that the ovens in the crematorium were installed by a German business in, I think, 1942. Now, these ovens, by the way, this was not a concentration camp, or this was not a death camp in the sense that they baked people alive there like they did in Auschwitz. This was a concentration camp where they brought people in and they basically experimented on them and starved them to death. Thousands of people died there. This is where Joseph Mengele did his experiments, where he experimented even on children like they were lab rats. Well, if there is no God, who's to say he's really wrong? We all know that's wrong. Well, why? There's a standard beyond us. There must be. In fact, how do you know who's right and who's wrong? Is it Mother Teresa or Hitler? How could you discover who was right and who's wrong? Well, let me ask you the question this way. How do you know which map of Scotland is better? Is it map A or is it map B? What would you need to see in order to know? Yeah, you would need to see a real unchanging place called Scotland. If Scotland doesn't exist, those two maps are meaningless. But since Scotland does exist, we can see that map A, while it's not perfect, is a better representation of the real Scotland than is map B. In other words, we have a reference point. We have a real Scotland that we can measure the maps against. It's an objective reference point. Well, that's exactly what we do when we compare Mother Teresa and Hitler. Mother Teresa wasn't the standard. Hitler wasn't the standard. There's a standard beyond both of them by which we measure both of them. And we say Mother Teresa measured up to the standard better than did Hitler. If the standard didn't exist, there'd be no objective way to judge between Mother Teresa and Hitler. It'd all be just a matter of opinion. What is the standard? God's unchanging eternal nature. That's one reason God doesn't change. If he could change, he wouldn't be the standard. You couldn't measure morality. He is the unchanging standard of morality. Now, everybody knows right and wrong, but it's not just about knowing right and wrong. There has to be a standard, even if you don't know it. It's got to be out there. By the way, most of us know right from wrong not by our actions, but by our reactions. For example, I may not think stealing's wrong if I steal from you, but what do I say the second you steal from me? Hey, wait a minute, that's wrong. If anyone ever tells you they don't believe in real right and wrong, just kick them in the shins and take their iPod, okay? They're going to get over that misbelief very quickly. In fact, there was at Indiana University a number of years ago, there was a professor giving a course in ethics, and he told his class, he said, you could write a paper on anything you want to write on. It just has to be related to ethics. I just have a few requirements. Can't be more than 20 typewritten pages. It's got to be in my office by October 15th. It's got to be properly footnoted and referenced. Great. Had this atheist in the class who wrote this paper on the merits of moral relativism. He said, there is no such thing as right and wrong. It's all a matter of opinion. You like chocolate, I like vanilla. There is no real justice. It's just all relative. He handed it in on time. It was properly footnoted and referenced. It was no more than 20 pages, and he handed it in a handsome blue folder. And the professor got the paper, took it back to his office. It said, there is no such thing as a real right and wrong. It's all a matter of opinion. You like chocolate, I like vanilla. He closed it up. He wrote on the cover, F, I don't like blue folders. Next class, he handed it back to the student. Student got his paper back. F, I don't like blue folders. After the class was over, he stormed up to the professor. He said, F, I don't like blue folders. That is not fair. That is not right. That is not just. Professor said, whoa, hold on. Wait. Let me make sure I get this paper right. I read a lot of papers. I want to make sure I got yours right. Wasn't your paper the one that said there is no such thing as fairness? There is no such thing as rightness? There is no such thing as justice? It's all a matter of opinion. You like chocolate. I like vanilla. The student said, yeah, that's my view. The professor said, I don't like blue. You get an F. Suddenly, the light bulb went off in the student's head. Why? Because he was judging the professor against an unchangeable standard of justice, something that he said didn't exist in his paper. You see, as soon as you treat somebody unjustly, they realize there really is justice out there. It's out there. We know it. In fact, if there is no objective morality, then the Nazis were not wrong. I was at Michigan State a couple of years ago, and during the Q&A, there were a couple of atheists sitting right over here. And I got talking to them. I said, well, you guys are atheists. What's your standard of morality? And one of the atheists said, whatever the majority decides is morally right. And I said, are you telling me that if you lived in Nazi Germany and the majority decided to murder Jews, that murdering Jews would be morally right? And he stopped, he paused, he blushed, and he went, yes. And his atheist buddy sitting right next to him looked at him and yelled, no! The first guy knew that the right answer was no. But in order to be consistent with his atheism, he had to say yes. And then you could ask him, well, why the majority? Why not the minority? Why not just one guy? Who said? See, that's the big problem with atheism when it comes to morality. Who said? The majority? Who said the majority? That's all relative. In fact, if there is no objective morality, love is no better than rape. Freedom is no better than slavery. Tolerance is no better than intolerance. What's the difference? You say one hurts and the other doesn't. Who cares about hurting if there's no standard of morality? It's all a matter of opinion anyway. Religious crusades are not wrong. I can't tell you how many times I hear atheists saying, you religious people, you were so evil during the crusades. Yeah, well, if there's no God, there's nothing wrong with doing crusades either, because there's no standard of rightness, so I can do whatever I want. See, the arguments they have against God, they've got to borrow from God in order to use against him. In other words, you can't complain about the problem of evil unless God exists. C.S. Lewis was an atheist, as you know, originally, and then he became a Christian. And one of the reasons he became a Christian was because he realized his argument against God was wrong, because he thought there was too much injustice in the world. And then he realized something about his argument. There was a big flaw in his argument. Here's what he wrote in Mere Christianity. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? If you've got no reference point, you can't call anything just or unjust. And yet Lewis knew there was injustice. If he knew there was injustice, he knew there must have been justice. In other words, the shadows prove the sunshine. Evil does not disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God. Why? Because in order to have evil, in order to have shadows, you got to have sunshine. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. In other words, you can have good without evil, but you can't have evil without good. So evil doesn't disprove God. It may prove there's a devil again, but it doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was a standard of good. And there'd be no such thing as a standard of good unless God exists. Now, this next point here is absolutely critical to get, because if you're ever talking to people about this, they are going to confuse categories. And as a good apologist, somebody who knows how to give evidence for your view, you want to be able to untangle the confusion that they have. Let me point out two things I am not saying, or we are not saying with this argument. We are not saying atheists can't be moral. They can. In fact, during my debates with Hitchens, I kept saying, hey, I'm not saying you're a bad guy, Christopher. I'm not saying that atheists don't know morality. They do. By the way, do you need the Bible to know right from wrong? No, you don't need the Bible to know right from wrong. In fact, our country was started on what? We hold these truths to be self-evident. This is from Romans chapter 2. Paul even teaches this. The Gentiles who don't have the law written on their hearts. They know right from wrong because God has written it on their hearts. In fact, if you had to know the Bible to know right from wrong, that God was unjust for judging the entire generation of Noah. They didn't have a Bible, but he said they were evil, and they knew they were evil. Now, the Bible will give you more detail, but you know basic right and wrong from the moral law written on your heart. So we're not saying they can't be moral. We're not saying they don't know morality. What we are saying is that atheists can't justify morality. They can theorize about how we know murder is wrong, but atheism provides no immaterial objective standard that establishes why murder is wrong. Now, stick with me for just a minute on this. This is an important distinction. And if you can make this distinction to people, you can clear up a lot of confusion. This is the distinction that philosophers call epistemology and ontology. Epistemology is how you know something. How do you know that murder's wrong? Well, that's one question, but there's another question, and that's ontology. Why is murder wrong? Why is there a law that says murder's wrong? Where does that come from? It's one thing to know it, it's another thing to explain what it is. Where does it come from? If there's no God, this law doesn't exist. Because you don't get moral laws from biological processes. Let me give you an illustration of this. The distinction between epistemology and ontology is the distinction that you can use when you're talking about the times tables. Like, I learned the times tables from my 4th grade teacher, Mr. Fisher. He taught them to me. That's how I came to know them. That's epistemology. But the times tables existed long before me or Mr. Fisher ever existed. That's ontology. Right? Before he ever drew his first breath, before I ever drew my first breath, 4 times 4 equaled 16. That's ontology. It existed. Same is true with morality. Maybe I learned morality through evolution, if it were true. Maybe I learned it through my society or my parents or my school teachers. But why is murder wrong? Not just because they said so. There's got to be a standard outside of us that establishes this moral law. And it seems that an immaterial objective standard of justice requires a theistic God. So when somebody like Christopher Hitchens, God rest his soul, said that God is not great, how religion poisons everything, when he writes the word poison, what does he mean in this context? Poison. That's a nice way of saying religion is evil. Well, how can religion be evil unless there's a standard of good against which you judge religion? And that would mean you'd need to have God. Do you see he's borrowing from God in order to argue against him? In effect, he has to sit in God's lap to slap his face. This is the problem with atheists. They borrow from theists in order to argue against God. They borrow morality. They borrow reason. Where are you getting reason from? If we're molecules in motion, if you're nothing but chemicals, and there's not a real you who are making decisions out there, you're not reasoning, you're just reacting. There's no such thing as reason. You see, atheism has to borrow from God in order to argue against him. In fact, let me also point out that religion does not poison everything. Everything poisons religion. See, I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. I can't live up to this book. In fact, I told him in the second debate, I said, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to this book. But I said, if I could live up to the book, I wouldn't need a savior. When you say religious people have done all these evil things, let me agree with you. But you're just proving our worldview. We have done all these evil things, but there's no such thing as evil unless there's good, and there's no such thing as good unless there's God. In fact, when people say I can't go to church anymore because all those hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal, we got room for one more. We're all hypocrites. That's why we need one another. The church, it's not a hospital, or it's not a country club for sinners. It's a hospital for saints. I said that wrong, didn't I? The church is not a country club for saints. It's a hospital for sinners. We're all sinners. That's why we need one another. And by the way, if you ever read a book by Christopher Hitchens, or he's passed on now, as I mentioned, you can tell he's just angry at God, unfortunately. In fact, at one point, he said, I will not live under this divine tyranny. Who's the tyrant? God. God's the tyrant. That's why I summed up both of the debates in my closing statement with him. I said, you can sum up Christopher Hitchens' book in one sentence. Here it is. There is no God, and I hate him. Said he's mad. All right, let's sum this up, and then we're going to take some questions and a break. We talked about these three arguments. I know we're going back to our previous time together, but these are the three arguments that we've laid out for the existence of God. And remember how we said that through these three arguments, we'll show there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator? Well, that's what we're trying to do here. Let's take a look at this. From the cosmological argument, we can see that this being is immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. Why? Because he created material, time, and space, so he must transcend those things. Secondly, he's also extremely powerful because he created out of nothing. Do you realize everything we create out of pre-existing material? God creates out of nothing. No space, no time, no matter. Bang. Here we are. From the design argument, we see that he's extremely intelligent. He certainly put this universe together with extreme precision, as we saw last time. He also has purpose. We're here for a reason. From the moral argument, we know he's absolutely morally perfect. And we also know he's personal. How do we know he's personal from the moral argument? Because you only have a moral obligation to persons. You don't have a moral obligation to impersonal forces. If you go try and dunk a basketball, you're not sinning against the law of gravity. You only sin against persons. By the way, we also know he's personal from the cosmological argument. How so? Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice. Impersonal forces don't make choices. Gravity does not decide, look, if he drops that remote one more time, I'm not going to pull it to the ground. Gravity doesn't decide anything, right? It just does it over and over again. Well, to go from nothingness to a state of creation, a choice must have been made, and only persons make choices. So check this out now. We have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, purposeful, morally perfect, personal creator. This is the God of biblical Christianity identified without reference to the Bible. We've got the God of the Bible without opening the Bible. Now, does this mean that Christianity is true at this point? No. This is necessary for Christianity to be true, but not sufficient. We need more evidence. We don't even know about Jesus yet. We haven't gotten there. We just see that it appears there's a theistic God out there. In fact, if our reasoning is good, last time we were here, we pointed out these are the three major religious worldviews: theism, pantheism, and atheism. We've just given evidence for theism. God made all. If our evidence is good and our reasoning's good to this point, what does that do for pantheism and atheism? They can't be true. Law of non-contradiction. We've talked about this. So we say, okay, which of these theisms is true? Judaism, Christianity, or Islam? Well, before we do that, let's point out that none of these world religions can be true if our reasoning is good to this point. Now, what I am not saying, hear me clearly here, I am not saying that everything taught by the world religions on the right is false. I'm not saying that every teaching that they teach is false. What I am saying is that when it comes to the existence and nature of God, the world religions on the right appear to have it wrong. Maybe they're right about other things, but when it comes to the existence and nature of God, they appear to have it wrong. Now, some people will ask, why is Mormonism up there? Why is Mormonism up there? Because it's polytheistic. Doesn't mean every Mormon believes this, but their official doctrine is, as man is, God once was. That one day God was a man. And one day, if you're a good Mormon, you're going to become a god of your own planet. And your wife is going to be eternally pregnant. I'm not making this up. But this is Mormon doctrine. Doesn't mean every Mormon believes this, but that's what they believe. They're polytheists, okay? Now, which one of these world religions is true? Is it Judaism, is it Christianity, or is it Islam? Actually, maybe none of them are true. Maybe they just have theism right, but nothing else. That's possible. But if God does exist and wants to tell us which one of these is true, what could he do? He could do something only he could do, and that would be a miracle. And that's going to be question 3, and we're going to get to that after the break. And if Derwin's here, he'll do a miracle, as I mentioned, after the break. But before we get to the break, we got to take a few questions. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Dr. Turek, you talked about how scientists and philosophers come to the evidence with a predisposed point of view. When Charles Darwin set foot on the Beagle and headed towards South America, did he come with a predisposed view, antagonistic towards Christianity or theism, or was this something that was developed or imposed upon him? Because Christians view him as the great evil scientist, while the atheists view him as the great hero.
Right.
What was his predisposed point of view, and did it change over time?
Well, I'll tell you the truth, I don't know how, and I don't know if there's a biography on him that actually goes into that. That's a good question. I don't know what his predisposed view when he went down there was. I have heard, and I haven't verified this, but I think his daughter died. Do you know about that, Nate? Or, I think he had some tragedy in his life which kind of predisposed him against God for a while. Now, when he wrote the original On the Origin of Species in 1859, he actually believed in a creator. In fact, he didn't say anything about where the original first life came from. He just noted there appeared to be a common ancestral relationship. It was only in later editions, I think in 1871, where the reference to the creator was taken out. So originally, he appeared to be more open to theism, but then later on, as it went on, he was not. But I'm not an expert on Darwin's personal psyche, so I couldn't tell you for sure. Anybody else?
Dr. Turek.
Yes, sir.
One of the issues that I run into, I'm going to back up to the cosmological argument in the second law.
Okay.
One of the pushbacks I get is open systems versus closed systems.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Sure. An open system versus a closed system. An open system would be like a living thing. A plant can get energy from the sun and can grow. But if there's nothing beyond the universe, then the universe is a closed system. In other words, all the energy in the universe is all we have. It's not getting energy from the outside. If atheists want to say it's possible that there's something outside the universe feeding it energy, then we'd have to ask them, what is that thing? Christians can say, yes, there's something beyond the universe that can feed it energy. In fact, Robert Jastrow, the great agnostic astronomer who wrote the book God and the Astronomer, said that if the universe is winding down like a clock, somebody must have wound it up to begin with. Why was all this energy infused into the universe in the beginning? And the second law of thermodynamics says the total amount of energy in the universe, the first law says the total amount of energy in the universe stays constant. The second law says that the proportion of usable to unusable actually changes. So the unusable energy increases to the point that you have no usable energy left. In other words, you run out of gas. And this shows the universe had a beginning. Now, it is true, the Darwinists will say you can't use the second law to say that evolution is impossible. True, because once you have a living thing, you can get energy. The living thing has the capacity to get energy from outside of its system. But it would seem that the second law would defeat the idea that life could come from non-life without intelligence, because you have non-living chemicals, and nature tends to bring non-living chemicals to disorder rather than order. So it wouldn't appear that life could arise by natural forces without intelligent intervention.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Would you describe yourself as a young earth creationist or a progressive? I asked that question because I just found out even C.S. Lewis, even St. Augustine, they perhaps would fall into the category of theistic evolutionists. And there's a movement called Biologos, and they had the recent meeting, and some of pastors like Tim Keller and N.T. Wright, who are mainstream evangelicals, were part of that. So, and you mentioned in your talking about fossil records dating back to 500 million years. So how does a young earth creationist account for that?
All right, good question. Last week when we were here, I actually got that question, so I don't have time to go into it here. I pointed out that, very briefly, and we can talk offline if you want because we have limited time here, that on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I think it's young. On Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I think it's old. And on Sunday, I take the day off. Because there are assumptions, whether you date the earth old or you date the earth young, that you can't prove. You just have to make assumptions. I am not a theistic evolutionist. I don't think there's any evidence for theistic evolution. I don't agree with Francis Collins' position on evolution. I believe that God created Adam and Eve out of the dust, just like it says. And I don't see any evidence that God guided evolution, because even if you look at the fossil record like we've already done, it does not appear to be gradual. It appears to be instantaneous bursts of creation. So I don't think there's any evidence for theistic evolution. I don't think there's any evidence in the biblical record. I don't think there's any evidence in the scientific record for it. I mean, why add God to the mix? Isn't the whole purpose of evolution to avoid God? Why are you bringing God into it? So I don't think theistic evolution gets us anywhere. I don't think the evidence is there for it. And with regard to the age of the universe, it could be old, it could be young. That God created is more important than when. And you and I can talk later because we spent about 10, 15 minutes on that last time. If you want more details. Anyone else? All righty, why don't we take a break? How many